Tuesday, June 14th. They knew he had lost, and he pressed on anyway. We start here.
The claims of fraud were...
The January 6th hearings paint a damning portrait of some of Donald Trump's closest aides.
This is the language that people around Trump use, not me. Team normal and team crazy.
After last week's dramatic prologue, this was chapter 1. We'll break down these hearings. You know, bear markets, they can smell blood for miles.
Okay, just how much can the U.S. consumer withstand?
Is this just about nervous investors, or are we on the way to a full-blown recession? And they ventured into the Amazon to learn about the men destroying it. They haven't been seen since.
President Bolsonaro's first reaction to the story was to basically blame the two men.
The disappearance that has reverberated into the most remote areas on Earth. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. After all the drama of a primetime hearing about the January 6th insurrection last week, remember, that was only one part of several hearings. The others won't be in primetime, but they're a big deal nonetheless. And yesterday, they picked back up. And as I was getting ready to watch at home, there was one line from Thursday I just kept coming back to in my head, where the chair of the House Select Committee, Democrat Benny Thompson, called January 6th the culmination of an attempted
coup. A brazen attempt, as one writer put it, to overthrow the government.
You can say what you want about this committee. They do not use the word coup lightly. Think about its definition. A coup is an orchestrated takeover of a government by someone that does not have the legal power to do so. And if a revolution is an overthrow by the masses, a coup is a small group of people who have made a careful plan behind closed doors. So think about what Benny Thompson is saying here. He's saying there was a small group of people thinking to themselves, all right, we lost an election. How do we install our guy as the president anyway? That accusation is worse than just encouraging a mob. And yesterday, the House committee began its attempt to make that accusation stick. Let's go straight to Capitol Hill this morning. We're joined by ABC's chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, who watched these hearings. And John, according to multiple committee members, each day of these hearings are meant to kind of communicate one basic concept. What was that basic concept they were trying to drive home here?
This was simply rebutting the big lie, the charge that the election was stolen. And this was really, I would say, maybe the central mission of this committee, certainly a central mission, because the people that rioted and invaded, attacked the Capitol building, did so because they believed the false claims about the election. So if you want to set the record straight on January 6th, you need to set the record straight about the election.
What testimony made the biggest impact?
I think clearly former Attorney General Bill Barr.
Now, due to the length of Attorney General Barr's testimony, we're only going to include relevant portions. So let's play the video.
This was a recorded deposition. The committee spent hours with Barr and videotaped it. It was not a live witness, but they used extensive excerpts of Barr's testimony.
I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public were, that the claims of fraud were, and, he was indignant about that.
And Barr, remember, he was Trump's attorney general. He was the one that stood by Trump against the allegations in the Russia investigation. He was perhaps the most popular cabinet member among the Trump faithful. And so Barr comes at this with credibility for the people wearing those red hats.
Also, I was influenced by the fact that all the early claims that I understood were completely bogus and silly and usually based on complete misinformation.
He explained how in each one of the major allegations of fraud that Trump had brought up, he went through and he investigated using the resources of the Justice Department. He looked into those allegations that there were ballots stuffed under a table in Georgia, that there was a guy that trucked in fake ballots from New York to Pennsylvania, that there were huge dumps of illegal ballots late in the night in Michigan, and on and on and on. Barr explained how he looked into the allegations and how the evidence showed that they were just bunk, that the election did not have widespread fraud.
We'll look at something if it's specific, credible, and could have affected the outcome of the election, and we're doing that, and it's just not, they're just not meritorious. They're not panning out.
And then, John, it seems like easy for President Trump to say, well, that's one guy's opinion. But it really did seem like the point of this committee was to have person after person close to the president march out there, like more than Bill Barr, to say, no, we all were telling him this, all of us.
No, I mean, it was really a tour de force in that sense.
My recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted.
You heard from campaign manager Bill Stepien. You heard from the top campaign lawyers. You heard from campaign senior strategist Jason Miller.
To the best of my memory, I was saying that we should not go and declare victory until we had a better sense of the numbers.
You heard from really all of the people that were at the top levels of the campaign and who had gone into Trump starting on election night saying, look, this is looking bad. We have certain challenges we can make, but the odds are not good. And it ultimately said he had lost. But obviously, Trump didn't want to hear that, and instead he started listening to another group of people led by Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell. At one point, Stepien, the former campaign manager, said that he didn't mind being seen as part of Team Normal. And this did break down after the election into two teams. This is the language that people around Trump use, not me. Team Normal and Team Crazy. Team Crazy being...
Wait, they literally called themselves Team Normal and said the other people were Team Crazy?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And, there was I think a pretty powerful part of the hearing where they were talking about election night and how Trump wanted to go out and declare victory.
A few of us, myself, Jason Miller, Justin Clark, and Mark Meadows, gathered.
And Stepien thought that was a bad idea. Jason Miller thought it was a bad idea. Ivanka Trump thought it was too early to make any declarations about the election. So basically, all of the people that were really close to Trump and with him through the campaign were saying, no, you can't go out and declare victory. In fact, it's not looking good right now. But there was one person who said, no, go out there and declare victory.
Was there anyone in that conversation who, in your observation, had too much to drink?
Like Rudy Giuliani.
And it was Rudy Giuliani, and of course, that's the advice that Donald Trump took.
Right, now I did not imagine I would be doing this today, but we should say ABC News has reached out to Rudy Giuliani. His attorney says Giuliani was not intoxicated on election night, that he was limited to Diet Coke. John Carl at the Capitol, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Brad.
Next up on Start Here, lions and tigers, and stock traders don't even want to say the really scary one. A new low for the markets after the break.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir. America's #1 most watched newscast. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive
Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5. Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live. America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7. Straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
You never know what you're going to get on this show. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Yes, Whoopi! This mic on? Can you hear me out there?
Behind the scenes is always a better show.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what people don't see during the commercial break.
Right, they don't.
What happened?
I had no idea really what I was getting myself into.
That day that we walked out, I treasure that day. I couldn't sit there.
You're doing good, Joy. You're doing good.
Oh, yeah, baby.
It was crazy.
Behind the Table. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on Trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Ready for a little GMA-ish promo? Okay, here we go. GMA 7A every day with Robin, George, and Michael. That's how you start the day. Boom!
On the stock market, there are good days and bad days, but there are also really bad days. And then there are the days that might reimagine what the entire economy is going to be doing for the next year of our lives. Yesterday might have been one of those days.
The S&P 500 falling nearly 4%, closing in bear market territory. The Dow down nearly 3%, and the Nasdaq ending at more than 4.6%.
Let's go to ABC's business correspondent Deirdre Bolton. Deirdre, can you explain what a bear market is? Because, I feel like we tossed the word around, but we are now technically in one of them.
Brad, we sure are. What a sea of red on Monday. So the S&P 500 is down 20% or more from its most recent high, which for us was in January at the beginning of this year. So Monday, worth noting, fresh lows for the year. We're actually at the lowest level since March 2021 for the S&P 500, down more than 20% even year to date.
The overall takeaway is that the recession risk has risen, and it looks like it's going to be a lot harder than anyone anticipated.
If you're looking at the history of bear markets since World War II, quick calculations, there have been 14 bear markets. Usually the S&P 500 loses around 30% on average. And usually these bear markets, if you look at the average days that they last, it's 359 days.
And what happens when you reach a bear market? Do stocks are they just over when stocks go back up and we stop using the label and that's all it is? Or are there real kind of changes that take effect in a bear market that don't happen other times?
Well, it is a label, and it's really important psychologically. There's nothing magic, so to speak, that happens in the market, but it does affect confidence.
And they have to maintain profitability. What's the first cost that they're able to cut? Labor. Jobs.
And I think even before this point, more and more people were worried about recession. You have business leaders, for example, Elon Musk at Tesla saying, I'm going to cut 10% of my workforce. So there were grumblings and there are worries. And then officially, quote unquote, being in a bear market does not do a lot to boost confidence. Maybe it starts to affect business leaders' decisions to invest. Maybe it begins to affect certain decisions as to whether or not to expand teams and to hire. So in that case, it can have a psychological effect on business leaders.
Oh, why would we go on a hiring spree? We're in a bear market, the CEO might say.
Exactly.
So why is this happening? And where is it leading, I guess, Deirdre?
Why is it happening? There has been so much anxiety about inflation. You and I have spoken about this, and we got this print on Friday, which showed much hotter inflation than what many people were expecting. So 8.6% increase for the month of May, fastest pace since 1981. So worse than expected.
Trying not to just wipe my car for random wants.
Walmart is usually cheaper, but I'm finding now even going to Walmart, things are pretty expensive.
The concern here is that Americans are paying more for non-discretionary items, things that people need, food, fuel, rent. There's really very little way around cutting those expenses for most people. We saw gasoline hit a new all-time high, $5 a gallon, higher than $5 a gallon this weekend. So this is really hard for Americans to cope with. So there are these worries about, okay, just how much can the U.S. consumer withstand? But now the question is, what does the Fed do with this information?
Unfortunately, we've only had one time in which the Fed was successful in engineering a soft landing. That was back in 1994, but every other time the Fed really has slammed on the brakes and thrown the economy into recession.
On Monday, there was talk that maybe the Fed would consider raising interest rates by 75 basis points on Wednesday instead of 50 basis points. The Fed is really between a rock and a hard place. It has a dual mandate. That means it is supposed to support full employment of the U.S. economy, which we're pretty darn near close to that. It is also supposed to manage inflation, and this is the second part of its mandate. It's pretty big, and there are concerns as to just how aggressive the Fed is going to have to be to bring inflation back down.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's tough, Deirdre, because isn't it if you're trying to raise interest rates and interest rates are going up and up, homeowners are freaking out, renters are freaking out. The more you try to do that to get inflation under control, isn't that just worse and worse for the markets? It creates that recession you're talking about?
Well, exactly. The Fed is trying to slow economic activity. That is exactly the point of raising rates. The question is, will the Fed raise too fast, too soon? Will the Fed end up hurting Americans who cannot withstand any kind of shock? Those are questions we don't know the answer to. That is part of why investors are so very worried.
Hey, one other question. We've seen stocks lose value. We've also seen other things lose value, right? One of the biggest losers of the last week or so has been like these cryptocurrencies that they were promising everyone, like, we're the future. Yesterday, one of the biggest cryptocurrency lenders called Celsius, they suddenly tell customers, listen, sorry, for right now, you can't make withdrawals anymore. You can't get your money out of our little bank. What does this tell us about the crypto market? Like, would a bank be allowed to do stuff like this?
No, a bank, if you and I put our money in a bank, it is insured. There's the FDIC. No, I mean, Bitcoin was down below 24,000. I mean, the lowest level since 2020. I think what this is showing is a measure of risk being off, meaning that when the markets were going higher, when stimulus was coming in, when everybody was feeling good, then it's kind of fun to do a little monetary experiment. Okay, let's check out cryptocurrencies. It's the future of money. Why not? But now that you have these worries, really, about a recession, about inflation, about what the Fed is going to do, about Russia's war in Ukraine, about how all of this affects the national economy and the global economy, you have people saying, you know what, maybe I'm not so ready to participate.
There's also no bank, no centralized authority to flag suspicious transactions and stop fraud before it happens.
So if you have put money into some of these platforms and you're being told that you can't take your money out, for example, I know the company that you mentioned, Brad, one of their clients is a pension fund in Montreal. That's somebody's retirement. So these do have real life consequences.
Yeah, and in an environment where there's just not as much regulation, it's harder to even figure out what is the group that would give me my money back if things went bad, and what is the group that would just flounder and go under, run away. All right. Deirdre Bolton, really helpful stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brad.
There was a big story in the world of national parks yesterday, as more than 30 areas in Yosemite National Park were found to have been vandalized with graffiti, apparently all by the same taggers. But that also makes you think about how much infrastructure we have in these protected areas. Within days, Yosemite had mobilized rangers, taken statements from eyewitnesses. Well, in a place like, say, Brazil, there are far larger tracts of completely untamed wilderness, areas where native populations have had little or zero outside contact. That's how remote we're talking. Because of that, as profit seekers move into these vast areas, we're also seeing more and more instances where these pristine landscapes are looking more and more like the Wild West. And for days, there have been questions over whether one of these conflicts in Brazil just proved deadly. Let's go to ABC's Claire Bauer, who is based in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. And Claire, this is all taking place in the Amazon rainforest, right?
Yes, hi, Brad. Yeah, this is all playing out in a very remote area of the Amazon rainforest. It's near the border with Peru. It's called the Javari Valley, which is Brazil's second largest indigenous territory, and it's home to the largest concentration of isolated indigenous tribes in the world. Like you said, it's also a Wild West. It's where crime has surged in recent years, especially since President Bolsonaro took office. And it's where there's very, very little government oversight. It's a major smuggling route for cocaine traffickers. But most of all, it's a hotspot for poachers and illegal miners, loggers, and fishers who are attracted to all the untouched natural resources that this area has to offer. It's also where British journalist Dom Phillips and his longtime friend, indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were traveling. They were on a reporting trip. Witnesses say the two men had some kind of altercation with a local fisherman who they caught on camera, allegedly threatening them. This was the day before they disappeared, June 5th. The last time the two men were seen was in a boat traveling up a river. And this fisherman is now in custody. He's the main suspect in the men's disappearance, but he hasn't been linked yet to any crime. Police have only said so far that blood was found on his boat that is being compared to genetic material from the two men, and that they also found apparent human remains floating in the river. So it certainly doesn't look good at all.
Yeah, what happened to these men? Because, like, the family of Dom Phillips, this is the journalist, the British journalist, that family says bodies have been found out there. And I guess the assumption from some people is that it must be these guys that were investigating all these practices.
Indeed, yes. We're getting very conflicting reports. On Monday, Phillips' wife, who lives in Brazil, told ABC News that bodies had been found. And then Phillips' family in the UK told the Guardian newspaper that the Brazilian embassy in London got in touch with them to tell them that 2 unidentified bodies had been found, apparently tied to a tree. But immediately after that, Brazilian police came out with a statement denying those claims, saying that no bodies have been found yet. But they did say that they found belongings from the 2 men and, quote, biological material that they're testing. It's very telling that President Bolsonaro's first reaction to the story was to basically blame the 2 men. He said, quote, they shouldn't have been there, that they were on a, quote, adventure in a canoe, when in fact the 2 men were very experienced travelers in the region. They knew what they were doing.
My brother Dom has been living in Brazil with his Brazilian wife. He loves the country and cares deeply about the Amazon and the people there.
There was immediate criticism from the families of the 2 men that the governmental response was very lackluster. It took them a couple of days to get 1 helicopter up in the air, and this is a region the size of Austria. It took them a couple of days to get 2 boats out into the rivers. So it was a very slow response.
We are really worried about him and urge the authorities in Brazil to do all they can to search the routes he was following.
The indigenous activists in the area, however, launched a huge search effort immediately. They knew both the men, so they've been searching, but it took the government quite a number of days to get their act together. Eventually, they sent in the Navy, they sent in these special military teams trained in jungle rescue, but they certainly have been criticized for taking too long to get things started.
Well, and I'm curious, Claire, whether the handling of all this would tell us something about the broader story itself. Because, like, the bodies might be hard to identify, right? The staff might be under-resourced. Like, there are lots of reasons we might not get quick answers on these apparent remains. But critics of Jair Bolsonaro have said there's a reason he's not in a hurry to get answers to these important questions. And that's because of where he stands on these, like, vast numbers of people moving into the Amazon and starting their own mini fiefdoms.
What you have playing out here is you have these vast territories. I mean, the Javari Valley, where this is playing out, is an indigenous territory, so it's protected. It was created in 2001, but it's only home to about 3,000 people, which are the indigenous tribes that live in the area. Then you get someone like President Bolsonaro coming into office and making it very clear that protecting these indigenous lands is not a priority, and that he was definitely more in favor of industrializing, of moving into these lands to make use of the natural resources. I mean, deforestation under his watch has gone up at an alarming rate. The fires in the Amazon in 2019 were largely a result of emboldened farmers making these massive land grabs. They even had a thing called Fire Day, where they deliberately set fires to clear new land. And, President Bolsonaro also took measures almost immediately to start promoting agribusiness and mining in these areas at the expense of the rights of these indigenous communities. So basically what you have here is a situation where activists and critics have been warning for a long time since Bolsonaro came into office that his actions and his rhetoric are encouraging land invaders and illegal loggers, miners and fishers to act basically with impunity.
E as buscas continuam. Agora, os indícios.
President Bolsonaro on Monday said that the discovery of these apparent human remains and personal items belonging to the 2 men make it seem very unlikely that they will be found alive. And he went on to say that it looked like something, quote, wicked had been done to them.
Yeah, and whether Bolsonaro likes it or not, questions about this just continuing to get louder, including from the U.S. We've even seen diplomats pressing this at the Summit of the Americas. All right, Claire Bauer, they're in Rio de Janeiro. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Brad.
And And one last thing. Did you ever watch Scarface and go, man, that was awesome?
Say hello to my little friend!
When big tragedies happen, one of the first things that happens is a lot of people start blaming movies and media. It's the movies these days, right? There's too much sex, too much violence. However, yesterday, several major Hollywood filmmakers teamed up to say, we can make a difference. And from now on, we're going to.
They say the success of Top Gun Maverick will be a great boost to Navy pilot recruitment. Great. But then you can't say it's just a movie when it's this.
In a joint statement with the gun safety group Brady United, filmmakers like Judd Apatow, Adam McKay, Shonda Rhimes, Mark Ruffalo, Amy Schumer, big celebrities publicly made a pledge to be thoughtful about the use of guns in their projects.
Go ahead. Make my day.
They're not saying they won't use guns in their movies. The promises are more like reduce the instances in which guns are shown around children, include scenes of people safely putting their guns away, and at the very least, commit to one conversation before each project, thinking specifically about how guns are about to be portrayed and if the script absolutely calls for each use. And if you're thinking, big whoop, like better gun laws would probably prevent a lot more deaths than some movie scenes, these artists agree with you. But Brady United specifically calls out historical examples in which on-screen changes have saved lives.
So you should always wear a seatbelt, right, John?
Right.
Back in 2001, there was a big study about how few characters were shown on screen buckling up. Well, as filmmakers attempted to change that...
Fasten your seatbelts.
Buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye.
Adolescents started wearing their seatbelts more often. One study found kids who watched a lot of TV were actually more likely to think of seatbelts as normal. Smoking on screen has gone down dramatically in recent years, as have smoking rates themselves. Some advocates are actually calling on the MPAA to give an R rating to any film where a character does smoke a cigarette. So if a scene includes an extra line about taking the ammo out of a gun or locking it in the family safe, well, these filmmakers want that to be normalized as well, hoping that maybe there could be a few less horror stories in real life. I can literally clock moments from early 2000s movies where somebody's like, oh, better buckle up. And I'm like, yes, you should. All right, start here tomorrow. Hit that follow button if you want a new episode delivered right to your phone every morning. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.